I have a question for you. It's not a rhetorical question, it's an actual question. How many of you, hearing this text, would sum it up with something like, don't worry, or stop worrying and think about God? If you raised your hand yes to that, you're not wrong. That's how I read it too. Or I should say, that's how I used to read it. But then I read it in the context of this notion of shalom. Shalom, of course, is the Hebrew word for peace. At least it gets translated as peace, but it is much, much more than that. Shalom is peace for certain, and it's also wholeness and flourishing and joy. Cornelius Plantinga, who was president of Calvin Seminary for 10 years, defines shalom as, I quote, the webbing together of God, humans, and all creation in justice, fulfillment, and delight. Shalom means universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight, a rich state of affairs in which natural needs are satisfied and natural gifts fruitfully employed. He goes on to say that the prophets of the Hebrew scriptures dreamed of shalom. Here's what he said. They dreamed of a time when the deserts would flower, the mountains would stream with red wine, a time when weeping would be no more, and when people could sleep without weapons on their laps. People could work in peace, their work having meaning and point. All nature would be fruitful, benign, and filled with wonder upon wonder. All humans would be knit together in brotherhood and sisterhood, and all nature and all humans would look to God, walk with God, lean toward God, and delight in God, their shouts of joy and recognition welling up from valleys and crags, from women in streets and men on ships. Oh, what a beautiful dream. Jesus came to fulfill that beautiful dream, to be that beautiful dream of shalom. And his Sermon on the Mount is a summary of how we participate in shalom, blessing the poor, praying and fasting, generously sharing. But Jesus knew there was something that kept us from shalom. He knew that, in fact, there are lots of things that keep us from shalom. And one of them is worry. So as he often did, Jesus drew his listeners' attention to the natural world, the world around them. He invited them to look at the flourishing flowers and fields, to see how simple flourishing could be, how free of worry they are, and we could be. Friends, every time I have ever read this passage in the past, every time I have taught it, written curriculum about it, every time I have preached it, I have taken the perspective that most of us would. It's about worry. And every time I have glanced over at those flourishing flowers, those swallows swirling and swooping in the twilight, and I have thought that Jesus was using them as a sermon illustration. Look, Jesus said, the lilies are not worried, the birds are not anxious. Every time, that is what I heard, and that is what I preached. And I can tell you that I have talked to gardeners, and I have talked to ornithologists, and indeed Jesus is right. There are no worried wood wrens or anxious azaleas. But this time, as I contemplated these words of Jesus, a powerful possibility dawned on me. What if Jesus is directing our attention to the natural world, not as an illustration of his point about worry, but as an antidote to worry? What if Jesus is saying, when you start to worry, go outside? I know it isn't the way we've ever thought of it before, but it might be a way to think of it now. When you are worrying, walk out into nature. There are, of course, some people, like my friend Catherine, who does not like to get too far away from asphalt. Those are her words. Then go downtown, like the song says. It isn't about particular scenery, though, I think, for most of us. A walk in the woods is preferable to Michigan Avenue. It's about that sense of shalom, of wholeness, of connectedness that we get when we immerse ourselves in beauty and positive energy. It's about that sense of the crooked being made straight, the intricate connection of all living things. As Plantinga says, shalom means universal flourishing, wholeness, and delight, a rich state of affairs in which natural needs are satisfied and natural gifts are fruitfully employed. Because if we are there, if we are immersed and engaged in that, we are not consumed with worry. Worry, after all, is an act of ego, of idolatry of self, based on the belief that somehow, if we just worry enough, we can control the future or fend off disaster, which, of course, no amount of worrying can do. Plan, of course. Think ahead, absolutely. But worry? Really, why bother? And God knows how hard it is to simply stop worrying. Just because someone tells you not to worry, it's like being told to calm down when you're in a state of hysteria. But what if rather than say to yourself, stop worrying, you were to take yourself out to a park or a lake or a cornfield or a creek or a garden? And what if you were to simply pay attention to the beauty and connection that is all around you and within you? What if, even if just for a moment, you were to breathe in shalom and breathe out your anxiety, knowing and trusting God's provision for you and all of creation? I think then you could turn your attention, your time, your gifts, your resources, and your energy towards seeking God's shalom. Seek God's kingdom and God's shalom, and all these other things will be given you. Thanks be to God. Amen.